Once upon a time, in the heart of Ilara, a prosperous and serene village nestled between high hills and flowing rivers of the Yoruba land, lived a young man named Olawale. His name was synonymous with kindness, wisdom, and unyielding loyalty to the growth and welfare of his community. From the lush farmlands where he toured alongside his fellow villagers to the grand palace where he served the king with loyalty, Olawale was a pillar of strength. His face, coupled by the hands of the ancestors, bore a gentle smile, and his tall, well-built figure moved gracefully among the people, respected by both young and old. Ilara was a peaceful village known for its sprawling farmland, bustling market, and the grand palace of King Adeyemi. But over the past few years, a shadow had descended upon the community. A cunning and elusive thief had begun to plug the village, robbing homes under the cover of night. His strikes were swift, precise, and devastating, leaving the people in fear of what would come next. Olawale, being one of the community's most dedicated citizens and a member of the security committee, was the first to lend a hand in the effort to catch the thief. His heart swelled with empathy for the people who had lost their valuables, and he worked tirelessly to protect them. The people trusted Olawale, and while one day he had grown up in Ilara, his roots deep in the red soil of the land, he was often found helping the elderly with their farms, leading the young men in training exercise, and giving advice to the King's Council on security matters. The robberies had begun in a manner that seemed almost too orchestrated, like a game of chess, where every move had been predicted long before it was played. Each time the thief struck, the people would rally in panic, and the security committee, led by none other than Olawale himself, would investigate. Despite their best efforts, the robberies continued unabated, fueling whispers of a curse or the intervention of malevolent spirits. One fateful night, as a cool breeze swept through the village and the moon cast its silver gold glow over the land, the thief struck again. This time, it targets the home of one of the king's chiefs. The thief's audacity knew no bounds. The village was left in an uproar, demanding answers from the king, his chiefs, and more precisely from the security committee. How could this continue happening despite their efforts? Behind the scene, some villagers began to murmur in quiet circles. How could Olawale, a man so wise and skilled, always be one step behind the thief? Why were their plans to catch the robber always in vain? Though none dared voice this thought aloud, the seed of doubt had been planted, and it would soon be poisonous fruit. The king of Ilara, Adeyemi, was a fair but firm ruler, known for his wisdom and ability to bring peace to the land. He summoned a security council meeting to address the ongoing crisis. This time, it was imperative that no one, not even the security committee, knew the details of the trap they were about to lay. Olawale was present at the beginning of the meeting, but soon excused himself to attend to other matters, leaving the remaining council members to discuss the final details of their plan. With Olawale gone, they set the trap. They would spread false information about a meeting of the security committee in one part of the village, while secretly placing guards in another location where they believed the thief would strike next. This was a calculated risk, but one they hoped would finally bring the thief to justice. That night, the air was thick with anticipation. The village lay silent, as if holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. As the moon reached its zenith, a figure moved swiftly through the shadows, slipping past the decor meeting and heading straight for the treasure house of the king's most trusted chief. The trap had been set perfectly, and as the figure pried open the door, guards sprang from their hidden places surrounding the thief. In the pale moonlight, the guards dragged the figure into the open, and gasps filled the air as the face of the thief was revealed. It was Olawale, the same Olawale who had been the village's protector, the man whom everyone had looked up to, had betrayed them all. His face, once filled with warmth, and kindness was now clouded with shame. Olawale did not resist. Instead, he stood silently, staring at the ground as the guards brought him before King Adeyemi and the council. The village was in shock, their hearts heavy with the weight of betrayal. How could this man, who had been so instrumental in the growth and prosperity of Ilara, be the same person who had been robbing them blind? The following day, the great hall of the king was filled to capacity as the people gathered to witness the trial of Olawale. The atmosphere was thick with sorrow, confusion, and anger. The king sat on his throne, his face stained but troubled. Olawale stood before him. His hands burned, but his posture remained dignified despite the gravity of his situation. Olawale, the king's voice boomed across the hall. You have been a son to this land, a beacon of hope, and a guardian of its people. But now, you stand accused of betraying all that you once held dear. Speak and let the truth be known. Olawale's voice was steady, yet laced with regret as he began to tell his story. He had started stealing not out of malice, but out of desperation. His family, once well off, had fallen into ruin after a series of bad harvests. His younger siblings were starving, and in his eyes, there was no other way to save them but to steal. Being part of the security committee had given him an advantage. He had known every trap, every plan, and had been able to evade capture until the fateful night when the decision was made without him. I did what I did, not because I wanted to, Olawale said, his voice cracking, but because I saw no other way. I have wronged this land, and for that I am truly sorry. The king and his council deliberated for what seemed like an eternity. There was no denying Olawale's guilt, and though many felt pity for him, justice had to be served. The verdict was swift but fair. Olawale was to be banished from Ilara, never to return, and he was not to take a single item from the village as he left. Olawale's heart was heavy as he walked the paths leading out of Ilara. The village which had once been his home was now a distant memory. The people who had once looked upon him with love and respect now watched him live with sadness and disappointment. His only companion were the rustling trees and the soft whispers of the wind. He had lost everything: his family, his home, his honor. As Olawale ventured deeper into the forest, the air grew thick with an eerie stillness. The trees seemed to close in around him, their branches swaying with the faintness of wind. In the distance, a faint glow flickered in the shadows, a sign of life amidst the wilderness. Driven by a mixture of exhaustion and curiosity, he pressed on until he stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center of the clearing sat an old woman, her wrinkled face illuminated by the dancing flames of a modest fire. Her skin was withered, and her eyes, though clouded with age, radiated a strange sense of wisdom. There was no hint of fear in her expression, as if she had been expecting him. Olawale, she called, her voice low yet commanding. You are far from home, but your journey has only begun. The world does not end at Ilara's borders, and neither does your fate. Sit and let me tell you of the road ahead. He hesitated, but eventually sat by the fire, watching the embers glow and crackles in the quiet of the forest night. There was no magic in her words, no otherworldly aura, just a sense of knowing, a depth of understanding. As she handed him a bowl of food, he spoke again. You have lost everything because of your actions, but not all is beyond redemption. Life will offer you choices, trials, and challenges, but how you face them will determine your future. You must decide now. Will you walk the path of bitterness, or will you seek forgiveness, even from those who may never give it? Olawale remained silent, but the weight of her words settled deep in his chest. He had been banished from his home, his name disgraced, but was that really the end of his story? The morning sun filtered through the thick canopy of trees, casting long shadows on the forest's floor. Olawale stood at the edge of the clearing, his heart heavy with uncertainty. The old woman had given him little direction, but her final words still echoed in his mind. "Head west," she had said. "There you will find what you seek, though it might not be what you expect." With nothing but a small cache of provisions, Olawale began his journey westward. The path was rough and overgrown, winding through dense forest and across rolling hills. The days turned into weeks as he traveled alone, with only the sound of nature to keep him company. Along the way, Olawale encountered small villages, some welcoming and others wary of strangers. In one village, he stopped to rest at a bustling market where traders sold everything from woven baskets to fresh fruits. It was here that he overheard the whisperers of land far to the west, a place where exiles and wanderers often found refuge. The village of Ajayi, an elderly trader told him, it is a place where those who have lost everything find a new beginning. But be warned, not all who go there find peace. Some never return. Intrigued yet cautious, Olawale decides to press on towards Ajayi. His heart still yearned for redemption, and perhaps in this distant village he would find the answers he sought. After many days of travel, Olawale finally reached the village of Ajayi. Unlike the familiar warmth of Ilara, Ajayi had an air of rugged resilience. The village sat in the shadow of tall mountains, its people hardened by the harshness of the land. The buildings were simple but stone, constructed from clay and stone, and the faces of the villagers were etched with lines of hardship. As Olawale entered the village, he drew curious and suspicious glances. Word of his arrival quickly spread, and soon a small group of villagers approached him. At the head of the group was a middle-aged man with sharp features and a watchful gaze. "I am Adigun," the man introduced himself. "I lead this village. Who are you, and why have you come to Ajayi?" Olawale hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. The shame of his past still weighed heavily on him, and he feared that if they knew the truth, they would cast him out just as Ilara had. "I am Olawale," he finally said. "I have come seeking refuge, a place where I can begin anew." Adigun studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Ajayi is a place for those who have nowhere else to go. But know this, we are a village of hard work and honesty. Everyone here has a role to play, and we do not tolerate deceit. If you are to stay, you must earn your place." Olawale nodded in agreement, grateful for the chance to start again. But he knew that no matter how far, the ghost of his past would always follow him. Life in Ajayi was far from easy. The village was self-sustaining, with each member contributing through farming, carpentry, or craftsmanship. Olawale was assigned to work the fields, a task that reminded him of his youth in Ilara. The soil here was less forgiving, the crops harder to tend, but Olawale threw himself into the work, hoping that physical labor would help him forget the mistake of his past. As the week passed, Olawale began to form bonds with some of the villagers. There was Iresi, a young woman with a sharp wit and an even sharper tongue, who often worked alongside him in the fields. Despite her tough exterior, she had a kind heart, and Olawale found comfort in her friendship. But not everyone in Ajayi was so welcoming. There were whispers among the villagers, rumors about Olawale's true identity. Some speculated that he had been banished from his homeland, while others believed he was a runaway criminal. He kept many at a distance, and Olawale could feel their suspicions growing. One evening, after a long day work, Olawale sat by the village fire, lost in thought. Iresi approached and sat beside him, her expression unreadable. "You carry a heavy burden," she said. her voice soft but firm because you've run from it. The past has a way of catching up with you. Olawale looked at her, surprised by her insight. He had tried so hard to leave Ilara behind, but the weight of his actions still pressed down on him. For the first time since his exile, he felt the urge to speak the truth. I wasn't always the man you see before you, Olawale began, his voice trembling. In my homeland, I was once respected and admired, but I betrayed that trust. I stole from my people, and for that I was banished. Ibesi listened quietly, her expression softening as he spoke. When he finished, he sighed and placed a hand on his shoulder. You made a mistake, Olawale, she said, but that doesn't mean you are beyond redemption. What matters now is what you choose to do next. Her words gave Olawale hope, but he knew that redemption would not come easily. The road ahead was still uncertain, and he would have to prove not solely to the people of Ajayi, but also to himself that he was capable of change. As Olawale worked diligently to integrate himself into the life of Ajayi, the villagers began to rely on his strength and dedication. However, Adigun remained wary of the stranger. He had seen many come through Ajayi with dark past, and not all of them had sought true redemption. One day, a crisis arose in the village. A small group of bandits from the mountains had begun to raid the outlying farms, stealing food and supplies. The village council gathered to discuss how to deal with the growing threat, and to Olawale's surprise, Adigun called on him for advice. You've worked security before, have you not? Adigun asked, his eyes studying Olawale's reaction. What would you do in our situation? Olawale's heart raced. This was his chance to prove himself. He spoke carefully, outlining a plan to fortify the villagers' defenses and organize patrols to protect the farmlands. His ideas were met with approval, and soon he found himself leading a group of villagers to implement the new security measures. But the bandits were cunning, and it wasn't long before they struck again. This time, however, Olawale was ready. The bandits attacked in the dead of night, just as Olawale had predicted. They crept silently through the outer farms, intending to take what they could and disappear into the night as they had done before. But this time things were different. Olawale had set up a system of watchmen along the farmland, each man stationed strategically to detect any movement. As the bandits began their raid, the alarm was raised and the villagers sprang into action. Olawale led a group of men to confront the intruders, their torches cutting through the darkness. The bandits, startled by the sudden resistance, fought fiercely. But Olawale's group was prepared. The battle was short but intense, with the villagers driving the bandits back towards the mountains. As the last of the intruders retreated, Olawale stood at the edge of the field, breathing heavily, his hands still clenched around the spear he had used in the fight. When the dust settled, the village gathered to assess the damage. Despite the attack, no lives were lost, and most of the farms remained intact. For the first time since his arrival, Olawale saw a shift in the way the villagers looked at him. There was a newfound respect in their eyes, though the trust he sought was still fragile. Adigun, ever watchful, approached him after the battle, his face expressionless. You handled yourself well, he said, his voice neutral. Perhaps there is more to you than I first thought. Olawale simply nodded, knowing that Adigun's cautious approval was only the first step. He had proven his ability to protect, but trust was not earned in a single night. There was still much to do, and the shadows of his past still loomed large. Though the bandits had been driven off, Olawale sensed that they would return stronger and more determined. The villagers, despite their victory, were still vulnerable. He spent the next few weeks training the men of Ajayi in combat and defense, sharing the skills he had earned during his time in Ilara. Under his guidance, the villagers built better fortifications and established regular patrols, and the morals of the village slowly improved. But as the village grew more secure, Olawale's mind became unsettled. Each night, as he lay down to rest, his thoughts returned to Ilara. The faces of those he had wronged haunted him, the elders whose treasures he had stolen, the families he had betrayed. He had fled from the consequences of his actions, but in the quiet of the night, the weight of his guilt was incapable. Ireti, who had become one of Olawale's closest confidants, noticed the change in him. One evening, as they sat by the village fire, she spoke bluntly. "You've done well here, Olawale, but you're still running." Her words cut through him like a blade. "Running from what?" "From your past," she replied, her eyes steady on his. "You have tried to start over here, and you've done good, but until you face what you left behind, you will never truly be free." Olawale didn't respond, but Ireti's words gained at him. He had hoped that by proving himself in Ajayi, he could somehow erase the sins of his past. But the more he tried to forget, the more those sins seemed to follow him. The bandits returned sooner than expected, this time in greater numbers. Their leaders, a towering man named Oye, had grown tired of the villagers' resistance and was determined to bring Ajayi to his knee. Oye was known throughout the region for his brutality, and under his command, the bandits attacked with renewed ferocity. This time, the battle was far more chaotic. Despite Olawale's preparations, the sheer number of bandits overwhelmed the village defenses. Fire spread through the outskirts and screams filled the night. Olawale fought valiantly, leading a group of villagers in the defense, but it was clear that without reinforcements, they would not hold out much longer. In the midst of the battle, Adigun fell. He had been caught off guard by one of the bandits, and though he fought bravely, a spear found its mark in his side. Olawale rushed to his aid, but by the time he reached him, Adigun was gravely wounded. Blood poured from the wound, and the leader of Ajayi lay in the bed, his breath labored. "What about you?" Adigun said, his voice faint. "You are a better man than I gave you credit for." Olawale shook his head, his heart heavy. "I am not. I have failed more than you know." Adigun coughed, blood staining his lips. "Then don't fail them now. Lead them, they need you." With those final words, Adigun closed his eyes, leaving Olawale to shoulder the weight of leadership in his final moments. There was no time for grief. However, as the bandits continued their assault, Oyega had set his sights on the center of the village, where the remaining villagers were making their last stand. Olawale knew he had to act, summoning the strength he had left. He rallied the villagers, leading them in a final charge against the bandits. His heart pounded in his chest, and the faces of those he had wronged flashed before his eyes as he fought. Each strike of his spear felt like a blow against his past. Each step forward, a move towards redemption. As the battle raged on, Olawale faced Oyega himself. The bandit leader was a formidable opponent, towering over him with brute strength. The two clashed fiercely, their weapons meeting with the sound of steel on steel. Oyega fought with the confidence of a man who had never been defeated, but Olawale fought with something deeper, a need to redeem himself not just for the people of Ajayi, but for all those he had wronged in Ilara. The battle was grueling, and for a moment it seemed as though Oyega would overpower him. But as Olawale looked into the faces of the villagers who depended on him, something shifted inside him. He could no longer run from his past. If he was to find redemption, it would be here, in this moment, protecting those who had given him a second chance. With a final burst of strength, Olawale disarmed Oyega and delivered the decisive blow. The bandits' leader fell to the ground, his reign of terror over. The remaining bandits, seeing their leaders defeated, fled into the night, leaving Ajayi in peace at last. The village of Ajayi had survived the attack, but the cost had been high. Adigun's death left a void in the leadership, and the villagers turned to Olawale not just as a defender, but as a leader. Despite his doubts, Olawale accepted the responsibility, knowing that this was the path he had chosen. Under his leadership, the village began to rebuild. The scars of the battle were still fresh, but the villagers were resilient, and slowly life returned to normal. Olawale worked tirelessly to ensure the safety and prosperity of the village, but the burden of leadership weighed heavily on him. At this moment, he still thought of Ilara. He had found a new home in Ajayi, but the guilt of his past lingered, an ever-present reminder of the man he used to be. He knew that he could not really move forward until he confronted what he had left behind. Months passed, and the village of Ajayi flourished under Olawale's leadership. Yet, despite his success, a growing restlessness began at him. Ireti's words from long ago echoed in his mind. "We are still running." Olawale had led the defense of Ajayi, defeated Boyega, and earned the respect of the villagers, but he had never faced the people of Ilara, the ones he had betrayed. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Olawale made a decision. He would return to Ilara, not as a disgraced thief they had banished, but as a man seeking redemption. He did not expect forgiveness, but he knew that facing his past was the only way to free himself from the guilt that haunted him. Ireti, sensing his internal struggle, approached him before he left. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. He nodded. "I have to. I can't keep running." And so, with a heavy heart but a clear purpose, Olawale set out on the long road back to Ilara, the village that had once been his home. He had no idea what awaited him there, but he knew that this journey would be the test of his redemption. Back to Ilara was long and filled with uncertainty. Every step closer to his former home reminded Olawale of the weight of his past. He had left Ilara in disgrace, and now he returned as a different man, though not entirely absolved of the guilt he carried. His heart pounded with the fear of rejection. What would the people say? Would they even listen to his appeal? Or would they cast him out once more? The village came into view at the break of dawn. The familiar sight of the small clay huts, the sprawling farmlands, the towering trees surrounding Ilara filled him with a mist of dread. Look at the edge of the village. His breath shallow, the enormity of what face bearing down on him. As he stepped into the village, the bustling early morning activities slowed to a halt. Farmers on their way to the fields paused, their gazes narrowing in recognition. Mothers drawing water from the well froze, whispering to one another. Olawale felt the weight of upon him as he walked towards the center of the village, where the elders and the king held courts. He had come back to face the consequences, and there was no turning back now. The news of Olawale's return spread like wildfire. By the time he reached the village square, a crowd had gathered, murmuring and pointing. The faces he once knew were now filled with suspicious anger and in some cases outright hostility. Among them were people whose valuables he had stolen, those who had trusted him only to be betrayed. Olawale stood tall, but inside his heart was heavy. He saw familiar faces, people he had grown up with, others who had once praised him, and children who had once looked up to him. All of them now stared with mistrust, their eyes silently asking the same questions. Why had they returned? Suddenly, the village chief's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. Olawale, Shivadegbete's voice boomed. He was an imposing man with a stern face, his grey hair and deep lines showing his years of leadership. You dare return to Ilara after your betrayal? Do you not remember the terms of your banishment? The crowd murmur grew louder. and Olawale felt the tension rise. He knew that one misstep could result in his immediate expulsion or worse. I remember Chief Adegbite, Olawale replied, his voice strong but measured. I have returned not to defile the terms of my banishment, but to face the consequences of my actions. I am not the man I once was. I come to ask for your forgiveness, not to reclaim what I lost. A rappel of surprise went through the crowd. This was not the defiant thief they had expected, but Chief Adegbite remained unmoved, his eyes cold. You think we will forgive you so easily? The chief ground. You who betrayed our trust, who stole from your own people, and used your position to avoid capture for so long. Olawale bowed his head, humbled by the harsh truth. I do not expect forgiveness, Chief. I only ask